Hello, and welcome to Audio for Narrative VR. Let me start by introducing myself. I'm Tom Bible. I've been in the games industry for about 15 years. I worked as audio lead at LucasArts on things like Star Wars 1313, Monkey Island Special Edition series, and a bunch of other stuff. I'm currently a freelancer and serving as audio lead for Oculus Story Studio, for whom I did Henry, and I'm currently working on their next project, Dear Angelica. So the things I'm going to talk about today are, I'm going to introduce Henry to you, if you haven't met him already. I'm going to talk a little bit about how sound works. I'm going to share how that works with binaural audio. I'm going to share how we combined game and film processes. We work with Skywalker Sound on Henry. But before we get there, let's introduce Henry to you. So it's a VR immersive short. It's about 10 minutes long. It's real-time, Unreal, and W-Wise. It's fully binaural, with the exception of the music in the main sequence. And it has a very low level of interactivity. It's mostly a linear piece, but there's a few look-at triggers at the very beginning. So let me show you the trailer, which is on the Oculus Share site at the moment.
Once upon a time, there was a little hedgehog named Henry. Henry wanted nothing more than to find a friend. But he loved to hug everyone he met. And because of his spikes, everyone would run away. Over and over and over again. It's lonely being a hedgehog. Until, on the day of his birthday, he made a wish that changed everything.
So, Henry is kind of a new medium. It's not really a film, it's not really a game, and has a bunch of new conventions that come with it. You got restricted movement, obviously due to the nausea issue and being tethered to a PC. Limited interactivity, which for a bunch of people, people at Oculus Story Studio are from DreamWorks and Pixar. Interactivity is pretty new to them. You have limited perspective changes, so we're not cutting every few seconds as you do in film. And there's no fourth wall. In fact, if you're in a space with a character and the character isn't acknowledging you, it feels weird. It feels like you're being ignored. And we're still figuring out what these conventions are, and probably these conventions will all change for the next project, but that's where we are right now. Okay, sorry. Sorry, so I'm going to show you a clip of the main sequence. So here you are. So there you go. So who's actually already seen Henry? A couple of people. Okay. And who's worked with binaural audio before? A few people. Okay, great. Well, for those of you that haven't, let me just start by saying a little bit about how sound works. So I'm sure you're all familiar that sound travels in waves, and it's made through the compression of air particles. But the way that most interactive audio represents sound is like this. You have a speaker on one on one side of you, and if it's on your left side, if you're wearing headphones, you hear it in your left headphone. But that's not really how audio works. What audio is really doing is something a bit more like that. So you're hearing both a direct signal into your left ear, or your right ear, I guess, but you're hearing it indirectly into your left as well, and lots of indirect signals and all sorts of things rebounding off walls. Sound's also giving you a ton of information. It can communicate things that the visuals might not be able to, like the weight and material of an object. It can communicate, if you've got a car and you can't see the front of the car, it can communicate what condition the engine's in. It communicates a lot about the environment that you're hearing it in, like the reverb you're hearing of my voice in this room. And it can communicate emotional meaning in a way that visuals can't do quite so easily. And just a quick note about hearing and perception. So hearing is our fastest sense. So visual recognition takes, on average, around 500 milliseconds, whereas audio recognition can be up to 5 times faster, or maybe even more. Hearing is continuous. The ear doesn't blink, so your visual information is being interrupted every couple of seconds, but your hearing is never interrupted. Hearing works when you're asleep, hearing works in the dark, and it works beyond line of sight. So it's giving you a load of information that your visual processing just can't give you. And because it's so fast, hearing is also the most powerful driver of emotion. So on to binaural audio. So everyone has a lifetime's experience with acoustics. And binaural builds on that, builds on our intrinsic acoustic understanding. So good binaural simulates acoustic physics and all the expectations that come with that. So to serve as an example, here's Henry's house from above. The rug there sort of is your area of movement. It's where you sit. I'm going to sort of show that as a square and a circle. So the circle's where you sit. The square is Henry's house. So from above, there you go. The headphones represent your listening experience. So with binaural off, what you get is that. Things pan left and right. Things get louder and quieter. And that's pretty much it. Ideally, with binaural on, you get this. Now, it's still a growth area, and it's not perfect for everyone, but it gives you the impression of being in the space acoustically. So that's great for sound effects, especially with head tracking. I think what really makes binaural work is head tracking. So the fact that you can know your head orientation and position relative to the sound source is very helpful. You can do things like look at the interaural time delay, the difference in time it takes to get the sound from one ear to the other ear, the occlusion that your head is giving you from one ear to the sound, all of those kinds of things. And there are more detailed talks on this kind of thing elsewhere online, so I won't go into it too much. Listener movement, so you can move right up close to the sounds, which for people from a games background is nothing new, but for film is pretty new and is very different from 360s. And room modeling, so as I was talking about, the sounds all rebound off the walls. If you're hearing a sound on your left, but you're next to a wall on your right, you hear it bounce off the wall on your right into your right ear as well. So, as I said, this is all very well for sound effects, but what do you do with music? We had only 6 weeks to really do the sound for Henry. So I figured that everyone is used to walking around with a pair of headphones in and experiencing the world at the same time and hearing that music and all that. So I thought, let's try it and see if it works, and it worked. It wasn't jarring at all to just do 2D music over a binaural sound experience. Problem was this 2D, 3D balance issue. So the sound of music in your headphones never changes in volume as you walk around. But the fall-offs from these sort of realistic sound sources you're seeing around there, from the hedgehog, from the window, the door, things like that, fall off very dramatically. So when you get up close to them, they're much, much louder. So you're getting this very dynamic, changing mix as you move around, but the music's staying the same, which meant the music was never really at the right volume, which is a problem. So there's another problem, and it's not very surround. You're just hearing stereo music. You can make it more surround by placing a quad around you. The trouble with that is you get this phantom source issue. So all of those blue things are coming from specific things like the hedgehog or the balloons, whereas the red music speakers are coming from just points in space. And now you can locate those. So it's a bit weird that you've got these random points in space playing your music. You can also accidentally walk right up to the front left speaker without really meaning to, which totally unbalances your surround mix. So a solution for that would be to move those speakers with you, and that would solve the source balance issue. But then you've got these points in space just following you around, playing your music, which is even more weird with the phantom source issue. So something I do want to say is context is everything. So this is what I did for the trailer. So the video I showed at the very start is just a black room with a hedgehog in it. I split the music up into the various stems and placed it around you with a reverb version behind you to balance the front and back. And that was kind of fun, and it kind of worked because you're in this black room and you can't see the room around you, so you've got no point of reference. It also means there's no perfect balance for the music because you can explore the mix, which could be a problem, but we sort of embraced that chaos. Things I haven't tried yet, but I intend to, is ambisonic music. So with the 4 points, you can tell where the points are, but an ambisonic sphere, and I know WWise is going to support ambisonics in around May, I think, is a 240-point sound sphere around you, which should help spread things around and stop you from saying, oh, the music's coming from there or from that point there. So binaural audio has a couple of restrictions. So every source needs to be mono if you're doing HRTF. You have these realistic, very dramatic fall-off curves to simulate how sounds fall off in volume in the real world. And you have to have accurate sound placement. So in a game, you know, if this is Henry, normally I would have just stuck one emitter on him and that would be fine. But in VR, you can go right up next to him. So I actually ended up with 3 emitters on him. So one on his mouth, one on his hands, and one on his feet. And that meant if you stick your head right up next to him, his voice is still coming from the right place, his footsteps are still coming from the right place, and all that. I should also mention that stereo is not really useful, especially with binaural audio. So as you turn your head, everything sort of moves around you, but stereo would just stick to your ears. So in Henry, if I had a forest ambience and I had a bird tweeting at me in my right headphone, that's going to follow me as I move my head around, and I think that breaks immersion. I personally think that 5.1 and 7.1 are not that relevant in VR. They are taking a series of point sources, 5 around you with a sub or 7 around you with a sub, to simulate a full surround environment. But ideally with binaural working well, we can do that without that, so it's not needed as much. Also, binaural recordings, like stereo recordings, aren't that useful because you've pre-baked all the HRTF information into the audio. So again, if you've got a forest thing, ambience, it might feel like it's all around you, but as soon as you turn your head and the bird follows you, that's going to break that level of immersion. So I found with every type of sound I put into Henry and the things I'm doing now, like Dear Angelica, I have a choice of somewhere along this continuum, like 100% binaural at one end and 0% binaural at the other. So at one end, it's highly immersive, and we sort of simulate acoustics to as high as the level as we can. At the other end, we get complete mix control, and it sounds exactly the way we want it. However, conversely, you have no mix control at the binaural end currently, and completely non-immersive audio at the other end. So to serve as an example, film tends to live over here. It's obviously non-binaural. The way you experience it in the cinema, if it's well calibrated, is exactly the same as it was intended by the mixer and the sound designer and the team. Games live a little further over. They're a little more chaotic. You don't have quite as much control over how sounds are played back. There's hopefully a bit more acoustic simulation going on in some of them. But VR, personally, I think, needs to live a little over here, to embrace the chaos that comes with acoustic simulation, to create that level of immersion that I think people are going to be expecting from their visual feedback. So let me say a quick word about the relative importance of VR audio. So bear in mind this is relative. I don't think that mobile game audio is not important. I think that's a whole other talk. But compared to what I'm going to talk about, it's lower down. So above that, we've got film audio. Film audio is obviously much more important to the experience. You can't really watch a film without the sound on. But in terms of production, film audio is included very much at the end of the process. So I would put AAA game audio slightly above that because it needs to be involved the whole way through the process in order to work. You've also got feedback that you need to give the player that you don't need to give in a passive film experience. So I would put VR audio at the top of this relative importance scale, just so you know how important it is to do really great audio when you're supposed to be immersed in an experience. So I said I'd talk about the game and film processes. So we started in Pro Tools, moved that into Reaper, implemented it in WWise, and it was all working in Unreal. Our edit was very similar to film, except that we had no panning, no attenuation, and everything was in mono. The fact that it was very similar to film allowed me to work with one of the editors at Skywalker to polish up my mix, or my edit. And then we took that mix up to Skywalker and had worked with a mixer up there and created a guide mix, which I'll go into a little bit later. So after our edit, we end up with 90 or so of these mono files. They're about 10 minutes long to go with the video we took of Henry. And I found that the way the animation was implemented was not as one 10-minute long animation. If you can see along the top there, it was cut into little shots that are generally less than a minute long, and there's 10 or so of these in the experience. And they don't necessarily all line up perfectly. They might sort of overlap by a couple of frames, or they might be a few frames apart. So I had to cut the audio up like that, especially as I wasn't guaranteed sync over really 1 minute. So, but the trouble is, there's tons of silence in there. Most of those emitters aren't playing sound most of the time. So I used Reaper to take those 10-minute files and auto-export them into WWise. And it took what could have been a 30-minute iteration cycle and brought it down to less than 5. So the WWise setup was very simple. It was really just one event is one wave file. The mix bus structure was very simple too. This is our one fall-off curve. So we used one fall-off curve because not only does it make mixing easier and simpler, but you create an expectation of how far a sound is away. The volume relates directly to how far it is away. So for reference, some games use a curve similar to that. So you can see it's a much steeper fall-off, and things get dramatically louder as you get closer. So Unreal. We triggered all the audio for Unreal in the blueprints, rather than the animations. And we used a post event on attach, which we created, which allowed us to play a sound on a specific bone very easily without having to do any fiddly setup. And because we all did it in the blueprints, it made it a one-stop shop for debugging and checking audio issues. It also didn't break when the audio object unloaded, which the post event does sometimes, or did at the time. I think that's been fixed now. So, mixing. So this is us up at Skywalker Sound. You've got Steve Bodecker there, our mixer, Ramiro on the right there, our director, and me sort of on the back seat taking the photo. So we're mixing up at Skywalker Sound, which is all very well, creating this guide mix on this room that's worth several $100,000 on a screen, so the three of us can hear it, and kind of setting the levels and kind of hoping for the best, because it works very differently when you put it in the engine. So we used WWise and the Oculus Spatializer, and we took that mix and put it into a PC, which is on the desk just over here, and listened to it with one DK2 and a headphone splitter, which seemed a bit weird in a very expensive sound room. But it kind of worked, actually. It got us about 90% of the way there, which was great because we only had a few days to mix it. And I took this mix and I took it to another studio to kind of finish off the interactive side of the mix. So I wouldn't recommend this as a process, but under the time constraints, it allowed us to use the expertise of Dolby Atmos Mixer to speed things up. So as I said, we had a single fall-off curve. A loose mix for the 2D, 3D balance. We just acknowledged that there was no perfect music level compared to the sound effects, and just sort of set something that worked for everything. We tried mixing at -24 loose, for those of you who care about loudness. But we ended up at -18, just because it didn't work when we were taking it to various places like conventions and things. It was just too quiet. So, just a note from me is if you want to have great audio in your VR experience, involve audio early. A couple of things it can help with. It can inform the narrative, as it is on Dear Angelica, which is our current project. It improves interaction design. There's so much information that audio can give you without having to rely on visuals or other forms of interaction. It gives time to experiment. So this is the bleeding edge of audio development using binaural, and we haven't really figured out how it works fully yet. So you need that time over the course of the project to try things out. And like I said, context is everything. So the context for each of your experiences is going to be different. It also allows time to solve technical issues. So there are a whole bunch of technical issues in the 6 weeks I had on Henry, and I wished we'd had more time to fix those. And it helps the team to think about audio throughout development. So having that cross-pollination between the audio department and the other departments is really key to having a top-quality audio experience. So a couple of recommendations. So my personal recommendation is embrace the chaos of binaural acoustic simulation. Yes, it leaves you in a place where things are a little bit more out of control at the moment, but it also builds up the expertise of working with this stuff and will help us in the future to overcome the current issues we have with it. It is also going to help with immersion. Experiment. So, like I said, context is everything, and what I've tried out here is going to be very different to what you're going to be trying out, I'm sure. Involve audio early, like I said. And try the Oculus Spatializer if you like. It's free on the Oculus developer website. And I'll leave you with this. So what's next? So for us at Oculus Story Studio, it is Dear Angelica, which is a much more interactive piece than Henry. Trouble is, all that interactivity breaks the film production. All the things that we were using with Skywalker Sound are no longer going to work. Ambisonics, I think, is something to maintain interest in. Certainly, I'm looking forward to the WI support that comes out in May. Real-time mixing is really one of the key points of the bleeding edge of VR audio. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with the HDR system that Battlefield uses, but it's a system that is very similar to, it models how your ears hear, but it also says that the loudest sound is the most important, and that's not really the case with VR audio. So I think we need something different, but I think that's a whole other talk. So I'll leave you with that. Any questions?
Just at the end,
yeah.
You said that, and you said at the end that in Dear Angelica, the interactivity breaks the film production model, and so you wouldn't be able to do what you did in Skywalker.
Yes.
Can you just talk a little bit more about, and you talked about it a bit already, but
yeah.
How much broken?
So film editors and mixers are used to working on a linear timeline. So, things begin at a certain place, they run all the way through, and they end at a certain place. When you start doing interactive and you start saying, well, you could go this way or this way, you could experience it for 3 minutes or 10 minutes or, then you end up with all these little chunks. And the production model that's very well defined, certainly at Skywalker, just doesn't accommodate that. It makes it more difficult to work with people who are used to that kind of thing, or they need to adapt their thinking to think more interactively. So it is doable. It's just not as easy, and it suits people with an interactive audio background a little more. So, anyone else? Yeah.
Did you come across any phase cancellation issues when you were spreading it out in steps?
Not that I noticed. Yeah.
I thought when you said embracing the chaos that
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the things that could come up. But, you know, I was just very much relying on the Oculus Spatializer to do things like that well. So it's at a stage, I think they've just reached 1.0 with that, and it is very much in development at the moment, and it's being worked on. So yeah, the things that you're hearing or you might not like with it right now, hopefully will get better in time. So I didn't specifically notice that, but there were other things that I did notice that I just had to live with. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Do you do anything special for people that aren't looking at what you think they should be looking at?
So we didn't actually do any mixing based on gaze. We used the mix to direct people's attention. So if action was going on over here and things over here were less important, they were de-emphasized in the mix. So they would be still there, they would just be very low. So there's a point where lots of things fall off shelves, and you can stare at the things falling off the shelves and rolling around, and if you focus on them and listen for them, you can still hear them. But the main character running around is really the focus of the mix. So by doing that, hopefully we draw people's attention to that. And I found, for the most part, that seemed to work. So, yeah, at the back.
Hello. You mentioned about when you're saying about getting audio involved early.
Yes.
Audio can inform the interactivity rather than the other way around.
Mm.
Have you got any examples of how you found that work?
It's a good question. So, trying to think. So on Dear Angelica, I mean, we're using it again for that same thing, to direct gaze. We're trying to have these things where you step into these illustrations that sort of grow out, but we then need to tell you, like, okay, turn around and look at something else. Like, you've experienced all there is to experience. So including the audio in that, we tried like looping certain parts of the audio and finding that actually what we thought would work totally didn't work and was really annoying, especially with some of the looping. And then we tried out different ways to sort of draw your attention there. So it really meant that rather than just relying on the interaction like engineer to sort of solve those issues, we partnered as various different disciplines to draw your attention over. So yeah, it's more taking an integrated approach rather than saying rely on audio for everything. So yeah. Exactly, yeah, that's what we're going for, yeah. So, yeah, sorry, at the back there.
Just for someone who's trying to choose which audio engine to use with Unreal, you mentioned WY.
Yes. So there are a bunch of different options out there. Yeah, Fmod Studio is another option. I know I've used the Unreal audio engine, the native one. I've used the Unity one, like a bunch of different things. Yeah. So I've had great experiences with WYs, and everything I've thrown at it, it's done 90% of. So that's my preference. Yes, it works on mobile as well. So how are we doing for time?